If I was to ask you, and not asking for anyone to answer out loud, but if I was to ask you, how many decisions do you suppose the average person makes on a daily basis? What numbers might pop into your mind? If you're anything like me, when I actually read this online and looked at the statistics, it kind of somewhat blew me away. Because the reality is, what studies show is that we make on average 35,000 decisions in a day. Now, I first thought about that, and I was like, no possible way, right? I may sit and watch a movie for an hour and a half, and the only thing I'm deciding is, am I going to get a drink of water? Am I going to get up and go to the restroom, right? 2 decisions throughout that hour and a half. But then if I go into my office and I sit down and I start to write a bulletin article, all of a sudden I'm thinking about the things that I'm going to put onto paper. I'm thinking about the words that I'm choosing. I'm typing out words, a decision, every stroke of the keyboard, plus compounded on the decisions about the paper. So I guess it could be. But the more that I read into this article, they started to explain it this way, that only about 70 of those decisions are conscious decisions, ones that really matter. So based on the amount of time the average person is awake, they're making a decision about every 2 seconds. Some 2,000 decisions an hour, 35,000 decisions a day, but there's about 70 that are of conscious thinking. Well, even within those 70, there's a lot of those that are completely inconsequential. It may be deciding, okay, what am I going to wear today? It may be deciding, what am I going to have for breakfast? What am I going to have for dessert after dinner? Is it going to be a blizzard? Is it going to be a sundae, right? Really not all that consequential. But then I got to wondering, how many decisions or how often do we make decisions that might be even so monumental that it could change the tide for myself or my family's spiritual well-being? How often are we faced with decisions that are of that magnitude? And I don't think that there's really any research to give us answers on that, but if you look at a decision that Lot made, a single decision that he made that would wind up turning his entire family away from the Lord, I wonder how often we're faced with a decision so monumental, even as the decision Lot had to make in Genesis chapter 13. If you will, turn in your Bibles to Genesis chapter 13, and I want us to look through this chapter as well as a little bit in chapter 19 and see if there are lessons that we can learn from Lot in this monumental decision that he had to make. Okay? Let's look first there at verses 1 through 6. Verses 1 through 6 in Genesis chapter 13. The text reads, "Then Abram went up from Egypt, he and his wife and all he had, and Lot with him to the south. Abram was very rich in livestock, in silver, and in gold. And he went on his journey from south as far as Bethel, to the place where his tent had been at the beginning between Bethel and Ai, to the place of the altar which he had made there at first. And there Abram called on the name of the Lord. Lot also, who went with Abram, had flocks and herds and tents. Now the land was not able to support them, that they might dwell together, for their possessions were so great that they could not dwell together." If we're thinking about this whole situation and the very reason that a decision came up, the reason that a decision had to be made, it was because they were both blessed so abundantly. Something we might take from this: don't allow your blessings to become your downfall. Don't allow the multitude of things that you have been blessed with to actually become your downfall. Because it is apparent that Lot and Abram were both so incredibly blessed that this decision has to be made, and now they have to part and go separate ways. And I think about even some of the old Westerns, and there was a saying typically, I don't remember if it was Clint Eastwood or who it was, but I remember in one of the old Westerns that one of these men would stand before another and they would say, "Look, this town's not big enough for the both of us," right? And typically it was something quite comical because it was more of a pride matter. Of course the town was big enough for the both of them. But when you look at the biblical narrative in Genesis chapter 13, a decision had to be made because their belongings and their livestock were so great that the land could not supply for all their needs combined. Well, when I'm thinking about this in the sense of not allowing my blessings to become my downfall, One of the things that we need to take into consideration when it comes to making major decisions is, many times when we are in the midst of success, we can sow the seeds of our failure. Many times when we are in the midst of success is when we can sow the seeds of our own failure. Because for whatever reason, some reason or another, success can cause us to feel as if we are incapable of making bad decisions. Maybe it's the case that we have this track record of making good decision after good decision after good decision, and all of a sudden we start thinking, okay, well, I have it under control. Okay, I have it all figured out, creating this illusion of being immune to making poor decisions. And those are terrible seeds to sow. It would do us good just to consider a few of the biblical examples of individuals who allowed their blessings to become their downfall. You think about even the fame and the fortune and the 1,000 wives and concubines combined that Solomon had that would ultimately turn the wisest man of that time away from God. 1 Kings chapter 9 through 11. Material wealth and belongings meant so much to the rich young ruler that he passed it up over eternal life, that he was willing to hold on to the material things over eternal life. And here's what's crazy about that. It's not that he didn't understand his decision. He went away in tears. He recognized his poor choice, but still chose the material things. You think about Pilate. Pilate was more concerned about receiving some political backlash than standing on what he knew to be truth in Mark chapter 15. He was afraid he would lose his position. He was afraid he would lose his authority, these physical things. He was afraid to lose those things. He allowed them to become his downfall. So if think about it in that sense, and even thinking through this in Lot's decision, and he's faced with this decision, okay, we need to do something different because we have so much, we have so many belongings that now we're going to have to part ways. Well, it has to be a matter of perspective. We have to make sure that we maintain the proper perspective, right? Matthew chapter 6 and verse 33. Seek ye first the kingdom of God and His righteousness, and all these other things will be added unto you. What are the other things? All the things that we need, the provisions, the things that we need on a daily basis. But first, point our attention unto God. Keep our perspective in the right order. And look, if my maintaining my great abundance of blessings becomes my primary focus, then my blessings have actually become my curse. Because now what I'm trying to hold on to is actually what is pushing me away from everything that God has to offer for me. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Matthew chapter 6 and verse 21. Look, you think about Lot in this situation and all the belongings that they have. I don't think it's reaching. I don't think it's a stretch at all to say that Lot would have had an understanding about God. He was with Abram even before chapter 12. He would have understood likely the promises that were made to Abram by God. He would have understood these things. He would have likely understood where the very source of all these blessings that they have comes from. But when faced with a choice, to choose a path of new direction, he chose a path that led his family to their spiritual demise because he was more focused on maintaining all his things. And he looked, he saw, he liked, he went. Paul said it well when he wrote, "For we brought nothing into this world, and it is certain we can carry nothing out." 1 Timothy chapter 6 and verse 7. And I just wonder if Lot would have known what Sodom would do to his family, do you suppose he would have chose a different direction? If he would have known beforehand what Sodom was going to do to his family, do you suppose maybe he would have said, how about we just cut some of our belongings and we stay close to godly people? That could have been the case also. Don't allow your blessings to become your downfall. But continue reading there in our text. Look at verses 7 through 9. Verses 7 through 9, it says, "And there was strife between the herdsmen of Abram's livestock and the herdsmen of Lot's livestock. The Canaanites, the Perizzites, they then dwelt in the land. So Abram said to Lot, Please let there be no strife between you and me, and between my herdsmen and your herdsmen, for we are brethren. Is not the whole land before you? Please separate from me. If you take the left, then I will go to the right. Or if you go to the right, then I will take the left. Now, we're going to look more into this decision that is made, and more so the reason why he chose the location he did. And like I said a while ago, he looked, he saw, he liked, he went, right? That was kind of the method of his decision. But it also seems like it's almost this decision that was made with haste. And something that we might take from this, or at least a principle that we could take from this, is not to exclude wise counsel. Think about it. When you're making major decisions, one of the questions that we need to ask ourselves is, what am I missing? What can I not see about this whole scenario? What am I missing? What is it that somebody else might be able to help me in making this major decision? And I think this is why the Bible often talks about making decisions with a multitude of counselors, because they have perspectives that might help me develop a better understanding about the subject matter. I mean, you think about Proverbs chapter 15 and verse 22. It says, without counsel, plans go awry. But in the multitude of counselors, they are established. There's great wisdom in looking to others who might have knowledge on a matter that you don't understand, and looking to them to seek advice, to seek that counsel, to seek understanding. You know, it's kind of interesting. I was looking and researching, and I found out that studies show that the part of the brain that you and I use to discern consequences of our actions is not fully developed until we're 25 years old, which is fine. That's great and all. But if you think about today's society, in most cases, before someone turns 25 years old, they've already decided what they're going to do for the rest of their life. They've also likely decided who it is that they're going to spend the rest of their life with. Monumental decisions, yet that part of the brain is not fully complete yet. And look, I'm not saying that you can't make those decisions. I'm not saying that you can't make good decisions. But at least realize you're working with hardware that's not fully developed. And I don't say that just to look to those who are 25 and younger and say, well, this gives reason why you need to look to somebody for advice. What I am saying, yes, it proves a good point, but at the same time, just because we're over 25, we can still seek out wise counsel, and it is good for us to seek out wise counsel. Remember, 1 Kings chapter 12 and verse 6, we learn that one of the wisest men to ever walk the face of this earth had a group of wise men. He had a group of elders who he would often speak with as it pertained to making these major decisions. He had wise men that he looked to, shouldn't we? Don't exclude wise counsel, because there may be something to the decisions that we are making that we are not able to foresee. So again, when it comes to making a monumental decision just like this of Lot, I might need to be asking myself, what am I missing? I might need to be asking, what am I not able to see, and what am I not taking into consideration? And even better yet, who is it that I might be able to turn to who has better knowledge about this matter? And here's the reason I say all that about this wise counsel. You think about this situation, you think about Lot and Abram and how this kind of plays out. There's a lot of speculation here as to why Lot didn't just turn to Abram and say, hey, you choose. Because really in that time frame and in that society, in that culture, it was more often that the older always had first choice because he was assumed to be the wiser. So there's speculation. Okay, Lot, why did you not seek out wise counsel? Well, how about this? Maybe we should ask this question. Why did Lot not take the matter to the Lord? Why do we not have anything in this narrative about Lot going to the Lord on this decision and asking his advice or his counsel on the matter? Oh Lord, I know the way of man is not in himself. It is not in man who walks to direct his own steps. Jeremiah chapter 10 and verse 23. Why was there no prayer? Why was there no communication to God before making this monumental decision in his life? And I'm reminded, thinking even about Jesus in Luke chapter 6, verses 12 through 16, the text says Jesus prayed all night long. He departed away from everybody. He prayed all night long to God before choosing his 12 apostles. Monumental decisions taken to God, communication with God before making those major decisions. Why was there not communication? Why was wise counsel not sought out? Let's continue reading verses 10 and following, 10 through 14. Genesis chapter 13. Verse 10, it says, "And Lot lifted his eyes and saw all the plain of Jordan, that it was well watered everywhere, before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, like the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt as you go toward Zoar. Then Lot chose for himself all the plain of Jordan. And Lot journeyed east, and they separated from each other. Abram dwelt in the land of Canaan, and Lot dwelt in the cities of the plain, and pitched his tent even as far as Sodom." Some translations may say toward Sodom, may be better rendered. Verse 13, "But the men of Sodom were exceedingly wicked and sinful against the Lord. And the Lord said to Abram, after Lot had separated from him, 'Lift your eyes now and look from the place where you are, northward, southward, eastward, and westward.'" Now we understand the remainder of the text is kind of God laying out those promises again to Abraham. But there's a contrast that's being made in the text that we would be good to recognize. And there's a contrast made upon what one sees and what the other sees. A contrast on the fact that Lot looked and he saw with his eyes, whereas the Lord told Abram, you look in what he saw with his eyes. There's counsel in there, there's guidance in there. Well, when we look to the things, when we look to making our decisions, don't stop at what the eye can see. Because the lesson that should come to the forefront is, do we see what God sees? Trusting in what God can see over what we can see. You think about the text that Mike read for us just a moment ago, Proverbs chapter 3, verses 5 through 6. "Trust in the Lord with all of your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge Him, and He shall direct your path." Right? Turn our attention to God. Look to His counsel. Look to His word. Let it be that which guides us. Recognize Him, and let that word guide us in our lives. Not only what we see, what we think we like. Remember, thinking about Lot, he looked, he saw, he liked, he went. But rather seeking the counsel of God. When you look at this account of Abram, and you look at this account of Lot, and you watch this storyline unfold, you see a contrast being made. Verse 10, the contrast of Lot looking himself. Verse 14, the Lord asking Abraham to look. And what Lot sees and how his decision is based upon what his eyes saw. And then we know what happens to Lot and his family. We know how disastrous things become for Lot and his family. At the end of the day, the last that we read about Lot is when him and his two daughters are in the mountains and his two daughters get him drunk and commit incest with him. We know how disastrous these things go for Lot. And it all starts with a decision that was made here. That's not to say that this decision directly led to the other things, but it at least put himself and his family in places where they learned things that they would have likely never learned if they had gone elsewhere. So one decision that was compounded by a multitude of bad decisions to follow led them to this scenario. Whereas if you remove the original decision, if you look beyond what just the eyes can see and think through this matter a little bit more thoroughly, then maybe you remove a whole host of other bad things to come. And that's the deceptive thing. That's what's so difficult about decisions. What's so difficult about life and understanding the consequences of the decisions that we make. Because we can't always see all the details that lay out in the future. Think about how Lot made this decision. Consider what was priority to Lot. You look there at verse 10. "And Lot lifted his eyes, and he saw the plain of the Jordan, and it was well watered everywhere." It looked pleasing. It looked good. It looked fruitful, right? Well, it's believed that Sodom and Gomorrah is located around or in the Dead Sea. Maybe the Dead Sea is the location of Sodom and Gomorrah, possibly. And if you go there now, there's really nothing beautiful that you can see there. Actually, it's like 1,400 feet below sea level, one of the lowest points on earth. And if you look at it, it doesn't look like anything good could grow there. But if you look at Genesis and you read this account, before God rained down fire and brimstone on Sodom and Gomorrah and obliterated it, and you take the text for what it says, and you ask, why did Lot choose this direction? It looked the best. It looked the best. It was like the garden of the Lord, verse 10, a reference even to the Garden of Eden. So he made his decision based upon what his eyes could see. And then the writer tells us this. He gives us this little snippet there in verse 13. But the men of Sodom were exceedingly wicked and sinful against the Lord. And you have to ask, okay, well, why is this little bit of information added here? Well, just because it looks good doesn't mean it's actually good. And it's as the old adage goes, the grass greener on the other side, right? The grass is not always greener on the other side, and we must remember that looks can be deceiving. And when it comes to making decisions in our own lives, we need to be able to look beyond the bells and whistles of the matter and really look to the spiritual things and make sure that we're making the right decisions for not only ourselves, but also for our families. When it comes to changing where you live, when it comes to changing your occupation, when it comes to changing a school district, when it comes to going on vacation, if it comes at the cost of my spiritual integrity, I need to rethink my decisions. You know, a secondary thing that we could add in here, a contrast that's made in Genesis chapter 13, and we would be amiss if we didn't at least bring this up. Do you notice how every time that Abram made a move, that it is mentioned right with an altar in that location? Every move that Abram made, there's a mention of an altar. Therefore, every move that Abram made, it was with in mind worship to God, no matter where he went. Secondary point we could make in that verse. All right, let's look at chapter 19. Knowing everything that was done, the reason the decision had to be made, the direction in which Lot had taken his family. Now looking at a final lesson, one lesson coming from chapter 19 as a whole. And we won't be able to read all the verses, but rather we're going to look at a handful of verses to build this point in this chapter. Don't linger in the aftermath of bad decisions. Don't linger in the aftermath of bad decisions. Now, some decisions, of course, they have consequence that is unavoidable. There can be consequences to our decisions that we have to bear with, right? We can't get away from them. We're going to have to deal with them head on. But at the same time, there are others that are completely avoidable, so long as we're ready to make a decision to move ourselves out of that situation. So long as we're ready to do something different, recognize that I'm in a bad situation, recognize I made a poor choice, and now this is not good for me, this is not good for my family, now I need to make another decision. There are some consequences that we can remove ourselves from so long as we're ready to make that decision. Well, Lot did the exact opposite. Rather than turning away from the wickedly sinful people of Sodom, he moved them directly in their midst. Because if you think about what was stated even in chapter 13 and verse 12, a best translation is the idea that he moved them towards Sodom and not necessarily directly in Sodom at that time. But by the time you get to chapter 19, verses 1 through 2, then it implies that now they're living in the midst of the city, right in the midst of these people. And also, if you look there in the first two verses, you'll see that he was there at the gates. And this typically in that culture is the idea of someone with a standing in that city. So not only did he move them there, not only are they living in the city, but now he's a man who is known in this city and a man with some authority in this city. He has established some roots. He's now grounded. He's built a name for himself in this wicked city. Then you have the two messengers come to the city, wanting to stay in the open overnight. Yet, of course, Lot, he insists strongly, verse 3, that they come and they dwell with him because he understands the very nature of the men in this city. Verse 4, the youngest men, the oldest men, young to old, all of them came, surrounded this house, and wanted to abuse these men sexually. He knew it. He understood the very nature of this people. He knew them to be so wicked that if he did not remove these messengers from the open city, that harm would come upon them. This is the city that he's choosing to live in. And you have to step back and ask the question, why in the world had Lot not already left? Why did he not take his family and leave this location and get them as far away from this wicked city as he possibly could? Lingering in the aftermath of his bad decisions. When told to escape for their lives, Lot, his wife, and his 2 daughters, the 2 daughters that still lived with them, they linger before they leave, right? He had other daughters in this city, and he went to them and tried to tell them about the warning of God, and they're so far removed from God that they seemed it to be a joking matter, the warning of God. And now here they are in the midst of being told, you need to leave, you need to get out now. And they linger. They had to be taken by the hand and actually drug out of the city, get them going in the right direction to leave this wicked place. And even in that, Lot's wife doesn't make it out of there. She's so attached to the city, she looks back, she's turned to a pillar of salt. Finally, Lot and his 2 daughters actually do get out, but the 2 daughters, they're still not untouched by this city. The 2 daughters then commit incest with their father. Look how much harm this city has done to Lot, and he lingered in this place. He stayed in this place. He built a name for himself in this place. Why did he not just leave? This original decision to go towards Sodom was because it was what looked best for his family, for his herdsmen, for his livestock, and for his belongings. And that original decision led to what would take every bit of that away from him. And he stayed there. I can't help but to think about what Peter says in 2 Peter chapter 2, verses 7 through 8. Lot, who was oppressed by the filthy conduct of the wicked, talking about why he lived here in Sodom, oppressed by the filthy conduct of the wicked, tormented in his soul day to day, seeing and hearing their lawless deeds. And he chose to stay there. Why didn't he leave? Long before all this happened. You see, we make a lot of decisions on a daily basis. I don't know how often it is that we make a decision that is so monumental that it is either going to make or break ourselves and our families spiritually. But I hope we have enough sense, if we do get in a situation where we recognize it's not what's best, that we are willing to remove ourselves from that situation. You know, the next time that somebody tries to come to you and say, look, we're in this world, we just have to be part of this world, quickly remind them, yes, we're in this world, but we're not of this world, that we're of the Father. The next time somebody comes to you and tries to say, well, the only way that you're ever going to be able to resist this world is by putting yourself in the world, turn and point them to Lot and his family and show them the tragedy of everything that happened to his family because they willingly put themselves in the midst of wicked people. Here's the thing. It may very well be the case that you've made decisions this past week, this past month, that have landed you in the middle of wicked people, that have landed you in the middle of something that is tugging down, that is pulling down at your spirituality. You may be faced with making a decision even now to turn and go in a different direction. Whether it be occupation, whether it be school, whether it be vacation, whatever the case. Are we willing to make decisions that are more focused upon our spirituality than it is upon the physical belongings that we have? The best choice that we can make, and here's where it starts. The best choice that we can make is making that decision to follow our Lord. That comes with our willingness to put on Christ in baptism, our willingness to be obedient unto His gospel, and then turning and living a life that is dedicated and devoted to Him. Maybe it's the case that you find yourself even today not a child of God. Maybe it's the case that you are, and you find yourself in the midst of all kinds of wicked people, and it is pulling down on you. It is tugging at your spirituality, and maybe you need prayers. Whatever the case may be, when it comes to making major decisions, don't allow your blessings to become your downfall. Keep the proper perspective. Don't exclude wise counsel. Seek out counsel from those who might know more about the matter. Don't stop at what the eye can see. Look to the spirituality in all things over the physical. And don't linger in the aftermath of bad decisions. If we can help you in any way this morning, please let it be known as together we stand and as we sing.